The space station, Nexus 7, hummed with life, a metallic heart pulsing with the comings and goings of 1,000 different species. It was a marvel of engineering, a testament to interstellar cooperation. And yet, as Aurelia Solaris made her way through the central concourse, she had never felt more alone. At 7 feet tall, Aurelia towered over most of the station's inhabitants, her golden skin laced with pulsing energy that shimmered beneath the surface like liquid sunlight, marked her as different even among her own kind. The Solarians were known for their slender, graceful builds and pale, translucent skin. Aurelia was an anomaly, massive, powerful, and perpetually isolated. She kept her eyes forward as she moved, pretending not to notice the way conversations stopped when she passed, the way mothers pulled their children closer, the way her fellow Solarians turned their faces away in something between disgust and fear. After 27 years of such treatment, she had learned to build walls around herself, to find solace in solitude rather than yearning for connections that would never materialize. "Excuse me!" A small Voxian squeaked, scurrying out of her path. The tiny, rodent-like alien nearly tripped over its own tail in its haste to avoid her. Aurelia sighed, adjusting her path to give the creature an even wider berth. It wasn't the Voxian's fault. Her reputation preceded her. Last month, she had accidentally dented a bulkhead during a routine maintenance check when her gravitational abilities had momentarily flared out of control. No one had been hurt, but the rumors had spread. The golden freak couldn't be trusted, couldn't control her own strength, was a danger to everyone around her. The gravitational engineering sector was at the far end of the concourse, and Aurelia was already late for her shift. Commander Lysander would not be pleased. But then, he rarely was when it came to her. He had made it clear that he considered her presence on his team a burden, a political concession to the Solarian Council's diversity initiatives rather than a recognition of her skills. She quickened her pace, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease, careful not to brush against anyone. The last thing she needed was another complaint filed against her for intimidation. It was as she rounded the corner near the diplomatic sector that it happened. Something so small, so ordinary, that for anyone else, it would have been unremarkable. A human male stood by the entrance to the Earth Embassy, checking something on his datapad. He was tall for his species, though still a head shorter than Aurelia. Dark hair, olive skin, a strong jawline softened by laugh lines around his eyes. He wore the formal blue and gold uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, impeccably pressed. As Aurelia passed, his eyes lifted from his datapad and met hers. She braced herself for the usual reaction, the widened eyes, the quick aversion of gaze, the subtle step backward. Instead, he smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Aurelia nearly stumbled. So unexpected was this simple gesture of acknowledgement. By the time she had recovered, he had already returned his attention to his datapad. The moment passed as quickly as it had come. But something had shifted. That smile, so casual, so thoughtless, had pierced through her carefully constructed armor, touching a part of her that had long ago resigned itself to invisibility. For the rest of her shift, as she monitored the gravitational fields that kept Nexus 7 stable, Aurelia found herself replaying that moment in her mind. It was ridiculous, she knew, to fixate on such a trivial interaction. The human probably smiled at everyone. It meant nothing. And yet, she couldn't shake the warmth that had bloomed in her chest at that simple acknowledgement of her existence. "Solaris," Commander Lysander's voice cut through her thoughts. "Your readings are fluctuating. Focus!" Aurelia snapped back to attention, quickly adjusting the gravitational parameters. "Sorry, sir. Stabilizing now." The slender Solarian regarded her with his usual mixture of suspicion and disdain. If you can't maintain concentration, perhaps you should request a transfer to a less critical department. Waste management, perhaps? The other engineers in the control room tittered quietly, a sound that scraped against Aurelia's nerves like sandpaper. "It won't happen again, sir," she said, keeping her voice neutral despite the familiar anger bubbling up inside her. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not here. Not when the slightest mistake would only confirm what everyone already believed about her. Lysander held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned away with a dismissive flick of his long fingers. "See that it doesn't." When her shift finally ended, Aurelia took the long way back to her quarters, avoiding the busier sections of the station. She needed time to decompress, to let the tension of the day dissolve before confining herself to the small space she called home. Her path took her past the station's central garden, a marvel of xenobotany where plants from dozens of worlds coexisted in a carefully maintained ecosystem. At this hour, it was usually deserted, which was why she was surprised to see a figure sitting on one of the benches, gazing up at the artificial sky where holographic stars twinkled realistically. It was the human from earlier, the one who had smiled. Aurelia hesitated, suddenly acutely aware of her size, her otherness. She could turn around, take another route back to her quarters. There was no reason to subject herself to potential awkwardness. But before she could retreat, he turned, as if sensing her presence, and once again, those eyes met hers. And once again, he smiled. "Hello?" he said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet garden. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" Aurelia glanced up at the holographic sky. "It's programmed to be," she replied, and immediately winced at how stilted she sounded. But the human just laughed, a warm, pleasant sound. "I suppose it is. Still, there's something to be said for predictable beauty. I'm Marcus. By the way, Marcus Clark." He stood and extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Aurelia hesitated, then stepped forward, carefully taking his hand in hers, mindful of her strength. "Aurelia Solaris, the gravitational engineer." His eyes lit up with what appeared to be genuine interest. "I've heard about your work on the new stabilization protocols. Impressive stuff." Aurelia blinked in surprise. No one had ever described her work as impressive before. Adequate, necessary, occasionally problematic, but never impressive. "Thank you," she said, unsure how to respond to such unexpected praise. "It's still in the early stages, but the simulations have been promising. I'd love to hear more about it," Marcus said, gesturing to the bench beside him. "If you have a moment, that is." She should say no. She should make an excuse and leave. This human couldn't possibly be genuinely interested in her or her work. Perhaps it was some elaborate joke, a dare from his colleagues to engage with the station's resident freak. And yet, there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that made her want to believe him. "All right," she said, carefully settling herself on the bench, which creaked slightly under her weight. "Just for a moment." A moment stretched into an hour, then 2. Marcus was surprisingly knowledgeable about gravitational engineering for a diplomat, asking questions that demonstrated a genuine understanding of the field. He explained that he had studied physics before joining the diplomatic corps and maintained an amateur interest in the subject. "So these protocols you're developing," he said, "they could potentially allow for more stable wormhole creation." Aurelia nodded, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them. "That's the hope. If we can better predict and control gravitational fluctuations, we could make interstellar travel safer and more efficient. That could change everything." Marcus mused. Faster travel, more accessible routes between systems. The implications for trade, for cultural exchange, for exploration. It's staggering. If it works, Aurelia cautioned. Commander Lysander has concerns about the practical applications. Lysander, Marcus repeated, a slight frown creasing his brow. The Solarian who heads your department? I've heard he can be challenging. Aurelia gave a non-committal shrug, unwilling to speak ill of her superior, especially to a stranger. Diplomatic credentials notwithstanding, Marcus seemed to understand her reluctance. Well, I think your work sounds fascinating, regardless of what Commander Lysander might think. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the holographic night sky cycled through its programmed constellations. I should go, Aurelia said finally, though with a reluctance that surprised her. Early shift tomorrow. Of course. Marcus stood as she did. It was a pleasure talking with you. Aurelia, perhaps we could do it again sometime? She searched his face for any sign of mockery, any hint that this was all some elaborate joke at her expense. But all she found was open, genuine interest. I'd like that, she said, and was startled to realize she meant it. As she made her way back to her quarters, Aurelia felt lighter than she had in years, as if some of the gravitational force she manipulated daily had been lifted from her own shoulders, if only temporarily. The next few days established a pattern. Aurelia would finish her shift, and Marcus would be waiting in the garden. They would talk about her work, about Earth, about the myriad species that called Nexus 7 home. Sometimes they would walk through the less crowded sections of the station, and Aurelia couldn't help but notice the curious, sometimes disapproving looks they received. A massive Solarian woman and a human diplomat, they made an odd pair, to say the least. But Marcus seemed oblivious to the stares, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He spoke to her with a respect and interest that she had rarely experienced, asking about her thoughts, her opinions, her experiences as if they mattered. It was during one of their walks, a week after their first meeting, that Marcus first touched on the subject of her difference. "May I ask you something personal?" he said, as they paused by a viewport overlooking the vast expanse of space beyond the station. Aurelia tensed. Here it came, the question about her size, her coloring, her abnormality among her people. "You don't have to answer if you'd rather not," Marcus added quickly, noticing her discomfort. "No, it's all right," she said, bracing herself. "What would you like to know?" "Your gravitational abilities," he said, surprising her. "Were you born with them, or did they develop later?" It wasn't the question she had expected, but it still touched on aspects of her life that she rarely discussed. "Both, in a way," she said after a moment. "All Solarians have some sensitivity to gravitational fields. It's how we navigate, how we understand our place in the universe. But in me, it manifested differently, more intensely." She held out her hand, palm up, and concentrated. Above her palm, a small sphere of golden energy formed, pulsing with the same rhythm as the light beneath her skin. The air around it distorted slightly, the gravitational field around the sphere altering to create a miniature singularity. "It started when I was a child," she continued, letting the sphere dance between her fingers. "At first, it was just enhanced sensitivity, being able to detect gravitational anomalies that others couldn't. But as I grew, so did the ability to manipulate those fields." She closed her fist, and the sphere dissipated. "My physical development was affected as well. My bones, my muscles, they grew denser, stronger, to accommodate the forces I was handling. Hence," She gestured to her towering form. Amazing, Marcus breathed, his eyes alight with genuine wonder. And this is why you became a gravitational engineer? Aurelia gave a small, sardonic smile. It was either that or become a research subject. At least this way. I get to use my abilities for something productive. Marcus frowned. What do you mean, a research subject? Aurelia looked away, gazing out at the stars. When my abilities first manifested, there was interest from certain scientific quarters, proposals to study me, to understand how and why I was different. My parents refused. What she didn't say was how those same parents had later distanced themselves from her as her differences became more pronounced, more embarrassing to explain to their peers, how they had encouraged her to pursue a career that would keep her away from Solarian Prime, the homeworld where her presence was a constant reminder of their genetic anomaly. I'm glad they did, Marcus said softly. You're not a specimen to be studied. You're a person with a remarkable gift. The way he said it, so matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious truth in the universe, made something tighten in Aurelia's chest. Not everyone sees it that way, she said, her voice equally soft. Then they're fools, Marcus replied, and there was a fierceness in his tone that surprised her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Aurelia felt as if the vast emptiness of space outside the viewport had somehow slipped inside her, creating a breathless, weightless sensation in her core. The moment was broken by the sudden blare of an alarm, high-pitched and urgent. What's happening?" Marcus asked, looking around in alarm as red emergency lights began to pulse along the corridor. Aurelia was already moving, her body responding to the familiar signal. "Gravitational anomaly," she said, her voice shifting into the professional tone she used in crisis situations. "Level 3 or higher, from the sound of that alarm. I need to get to the control room." Marcus fell into step beside her, moving quickly to keep up with her longer stride. "Is it serious?" "Could be," Aurelia replied grimly. "Level 3 means there's potential for structural damage if it's not contained quickly." They reached a junction where the corridor split in two directions. "You should head to the diplomatic sector," Aurelia said, already turning toward the engineering wing. "It's safer there if things go wrong." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." "Always am," she replied, and then she was running, her powerful legs carrying her swiftly through the corridors as the alarm continued to wail. The control room was in chaos when she arrived. Engineers rushed between stations, calling out readings and adjustments as Commander Lysander stood in the center, barking orders. "Solaris!" he snapped as soon as he saw her. "About time. We've got a fluctuation in Sector 7, near the outer hull. The stabilizers are failing to compensate." Aurelia moved to her station, quickly assessing the readings. "The variance is too wide for the standard protocols," she said, fingers flying across the controls. "We need to implement a manual override." "Too risky," Lysander countered. "If the calculations are off by even a fraction. If we don't, the structural integrity of that entire sector could be compromised." Aurelia cut in, something she rarely dared to do. "We're talking potential hull breach." Lysander's face tightened with anger and indecision, his pale skin flushing a mottled pink. "Fine," he said finally. "Implement the override. But if this goes wrong, Solaris—" "It won't," she said with more confidence than she felt. For the next hour, Aurelia worked feverishly, making minute adjustments to the gravitational fields across Sector 7, carefully balancing forces that could, if mishandled, tear the station apart. The work required intense concentration and precision, qualities she had honed through years of practice and necessity. Gradually, The alarms subsided as the anomaly was brought under control. The red emergency lighting switched back to standard illumination, and the tension in the control room began to dissipate. "Well done, everyone," Lysander announced, pointedly not looking at Aurelia. "Routine maintenance checks will commence immediately to determine the cause of the fluctuation." As the other engineers dispersed to their assigned tasks, Lysander approached Aurelia's station. "Your override was effective," he admitted grudgingly. "But I want a full report on the modifications you implemented. Every parameter, every calculation." "Yes, sir," Aurelia replied, too tired to feel any satisfaction at the backhanded acknowledgement of her success. "And Solaris," he added, lowering his voice, "I've noticed your association with the human diplomat. I would advise caution. Humans are known for their curiosity about other species, especially those with unique attributes." The implication was clear, and it stung all the more because it echoed Aurelia's own initial suspicions about Marcus's interest in her. "My personal associations are my own concern, Commander," she said, keeping her voice level with effort. Lysander's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "When they potentially compromise station security, they become my concern. Just remember where your loyalties should lie." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Aurelia with a cold knot of unease in her stomach. She finished her report in half the time it would normally take, eager to escape the confines of the control room and the weight of Lysander's implied accusation. As she made her way back to her quarters, exhaustion dragging at her limbs, she found herself wondering if there might be some truth to his warning. Marcus had appeared in her life so suddenly, had shown such specific interest in her work, in her abilities. Could there be more to his attention than simple human friendliness? The thought sat like a stone in her chest, heavy and cold. When she reached her quarters, she was surprised to find Marcus waiting outside her door, concern evident on his face. "I heard about the anomaly," he said as she approached. "Are you all right?" "Fine," she replied, her tone more clipped than she intended. "Just tired." Marcus studied her face, seeming to sense that something more was bothering her. "Did something else happen?" Aurelia hesitated, then decided directness was the best approach. "Why are you here, Marcus?" He blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. "I was worried about you. After the alarm." "No," she interrupted. "Why are you on Nexus 7? Why have you been spending time with me? What do you want?" Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by hurt. "You think I have some ulterior motive, don't you?" The words came out harsher than she intended, fueled by exhaustion and the seed of doubt Lysander had planted. A human diplomat suddenly takes an interest in a Solarian gravitational engineer with unusual abilities. It's not exactly subtle. Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "Is it so hard to believe that I might simply enjoy your company?" "Yes," Aurelia said bluntly. "It is." For a moment, they stood in silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken words and hurt feelings. "I should go," Marcus said finally. "You're tired, and this clearly isn't the right time for this conversation." Part of Aurelia wanted to stop him, to apologize, to take back her accusation. But the larger part, the part that had learned through years of painful experience to protect herself, remained silent. She watched him walk away, and told herself it was better this way. Better to end whatever this was before it inevitably led to disappointment and pain. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, replaying her conversation with Marcus, wondering if she had misjudged him, if she had allowed Lysander's insinuations and her own insecurities to poison something genuine. By morning, she had resolved to apologize, to at least hear Marcus out. But when she arrived at the engineering sector for her shift, all thoughts of personal matters were driven from her mind. The gravitational anomaly had returned, stronger this time. "It's not natural," she said to Lysander after studying the readings for several minutes. "These patterns, they're too regular, too precise. This is deliberate interference." Lysander frowned, leaning over her shoulder to examine the data. "Sabotage?" "It looks that way," Aurelia confirmed. "Someone's manipulating the gravitational fields around the station, creating instabilities." But who would have the capability to do such a thing?" Lysander mused. "And why?" Aurelia had no answer, but a creeping suspicion was forming in her mind. The timing, right after she had shared details of her work with Marcus, right after she had demonstrated her abilities to him, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Had she been right to doubt him after all? The next 3 days were a blur of crisis management and exhaustion. The gravitational attacks, for that was what they had been officially designated, continued, each one more severe than the last. The engineering team worked around the clock to stabilize the station, but it was becoming clear that they were fighting a losing battle. Aurelia saw no sign of Marcus during this time, which only strengthened her suspicion that he might be involved. She told herself that it was better this way, that she had been right to push him away, even as a part of her ached at his absence. It was on the 4th day, as she was making her way to the control room for yet another emergency shift, that she was suddenly pulled into a side corridor. A hand clamped firmly but not painfully over her mouth. Her first instinct was to fight, to use her superior strength to break free, but then she recognized her captor. "Marcus," she mumbled against his palm. He removed his hand quickly. "I'm sorry," he whispered, glancing nervously down the corridor. "I needed to talk to you privately, and I couldn't risk being seen." Aurelia took a step back, putting distance between them. "What's going on?" Marcus's face was grim, all trace of his usual warmth gone. "The gravitational attacks, they're not random, and they're not aimed at the station itself. They're aimed at you." "At me?" Aurelia stared at him in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. Why would anyone—" "Because of your abilities." Marcus cut in. "Because of what you can do with gravitational fields. There are people, powerful people, who believe those abilities could be weaponized." Aurelia felt a chill run through her. "How do you know all this?" Marcus hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Because I'm not just a diplomat. I work for Earth Defense Force Intelligence. I was sent here to investigate rumors of a new gravitational weapon being developed on Nexus 7. The revelation hit Aurelia like a physical blow. So Lysander had been right. Marcus had been using her, gathering information about her abilities for his own purposes. "You lied to me," she said, her voice flat. "Yes and no," Marcus replied, having the grace to look ashamed. "My name is Marcus Clark, and I am a diplomat. That part is true. And I was sent here to investigate. Yes. But what I found was you. And you're not what they think you are. You're not a weapon. Aurelia, you're a person. A remarkable, brilliant person who's been mistreated and misunderstood her entire life." The sincerity in his voice was almost enough to make her believe him. Almost. "And I'm supposed to just trust you now?" she asked, anger beginning to rise within her. "After you've admitted to lying to me from the start?" "No," Marcus said simply. "I don't expect you to trust me, but I'm asking you to listen. Because right now, your life is in danger." Something in his tone, in the urgency of his words, made Aurelia pause. "Explain." "The Varians," Marcus said. "They're behind the attacks. They've been experimenting with gravitational technology for years, trying to develop weapons that could destabilize star systems, create artificial black holes. When they heard about a Solarian with natural gravitational manipulation abilities, they decided I would be a more efficient shortcut." Aurelia finished grimly. "But the attacks, why would they risk damaging the station if they want to capture me?" "They're not trying to capture you," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. "They're trying to provoke you. They want to see what you're capable of when pushed to your limits. Each attack has been carefully calibrated to force you to use more and more of your abilities to counteract it." The realization dawned on Aurelia with sickening clarity. "They're studying me, using the entire station as a laboratory." Marcus nodded. "And they're planning something bigger. My sources indicate they're preparing for a final attack, one that will either force you to reveal the full extent of your powers or cause catastrophic damage to the station." "When?" "Soon. Very soon. That's why I had to find you, to warn you." Aurelia's mind raced, processing this new information, trying to determine the best course of action. "We need to alert station security, evacuate non-essential personnel." "We can't," Marcus interrupted. "The Varians have infiltrated key positions throughout the station. If we raise the alarm, they'll accelerate their plans. Our best chance is to find and neutralize their gravitational device before they can activate it." "And you know where this device is?" "I have a strong suspicion," Marcus said. "The readings from the previous attacks all originated from the vicinity of the Varian diplomatic quarter. There's a restricted area there, ostensibly for cultural ceremonies, but I believe it's where they're housing the device." Aurelia considered her options. She could dismiss Marcus's warning, report him to station security as a spy, continue with her duties as if nothing had changed. Or she could trust him, risk her position, possibly her life, on the chance that he was telling the truth. "Why should I believe you?" she asked finally. "How do I know this isn't some elaborate scheme by Earth Defense to get their hands on me instead?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. You have no reason to trust me, especially after I've admitted to lying to you. But Aurelia, in the time we've spent together, haven't you felt it? That connection between us? Was that all just in my head?" The question struck at the heart of the conflict raging within her, because despite her suspicions, despite her anger at his deception, she couldn't deny that there had been something real in those moments they had shared. Before she could respond, the station rocked with a violent tremor, more powerful than any of the previous attacks. The lights flickered, and the now familiar alarm began to wail. "It's starting," Marcus said grimly. "We're out of time." Aurelia made her decision. "Lead the way to the Varian quarter." They moved through the station as quickly as they dared, avoiding the main corridors where security personnel and engineers rushed to respond to the crisis. Marcus guided them through service passages and lesser-used routes, displaying a knowledge of the station's layout that went well beyond what a normal diplomat would possess. "How do you know these passages?" Aurelia asked as they ducked through a maintenance tunnel. "Part of my job is knowing how to get around undetected," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting he wasn't particularly proud of this aspect of his work. "And I may have acquired access to some restricted station schematics." Under different circumstances, Aurelia might have found his admission concerning. Now, she was simply grateful for his expertise as they made their way toward the Varian diplomatic quarter. As they approached their destination, the tremors grew more frequent, more intense. The station's hull groaned under the stress, and Aurelia could feel the gravitational fields around them, fluctuating wildly. "The strain on the station's structure is increasing," she said, her enhanced senses picking up distortions that would be invisible to most others. If this continues much longer, we'll start seeing hull breaches. Marcus nodded grimly. All the more reason to hurry. The Varian diplomatic quarter was eerily deserted when they arrived, its occupants presumably evacuated in preparation for whatever was to come. The entrance to the restricted area Marcus had mentioned was sealed with a heavy security door, its control panel glowing with a warning light. "Can you get us in?" Aurelia asked. Marcus examined the panel. "Not without triggering alarms. We'll need another way." Aurelia studied the door, then the walls around it. "The gravitational distortion is strongest on the other side of this wall," she said, placing her palm against the smooth metal surface. "I can feel it, pulsing." She closed her eyes, extending her senses, mapping the gravitational landscape beyond the barrier. "There's definitely a device in there, generating fields far more powerful than anything I've worked with before." Another tremor shook the station, this one strong enough to send them both staggering. Warning lights began to flash in the corridor, and a computerized voice announced, "Structural integrity compromised in Sectors 3, 7, and 12. All personnel evacuate to emergency shelters immediately." "Sector 7, that's near the main habitat ring," Aurelia said, alarm spiking through her. "There are thousands of people there." "Can you stop it?" Marcus asked, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but somehow wasn't. "Can you neutralize the device from here?" Aurelia hesitated. What he was asking would require her to use her abilities at a level she had never attempted before, to reach through solid matter and manipulate gravitational fields she couldn't directly see. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have to try." She placed both hands against the wall, closed her eyes, and focused. The golden energy beneath her skin began to pulse more rapidly, casting an amber glow over the corridor. She could feel the device now, its rhythm, its pattern, the way it was bending and twisting the fabric of space around the station. Slowly, carefully, she began to counter its effects, creating a gravitational field of her own that would neutralize the distortions. It was like trying to untie an impossibly complex knot in the dark, using only her sense of touch to guide her. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, the strain of maintaining such precise control taking its toll. Her muscles trembled with effort, and she could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. "It's not enough!" she gasped after several minutes of intense concentration. "I can dampen the effects, but I can't stop it completely, not from here." Marcus looked at the security door, then back at Aurelia. "What if you didn't try to neutralize it? What if you redirected it instead?" "What do you mean?" "The device is generating gravitational waves, right? What if, instead of trying to cancel them out, you redirected them back at the device itself? Create a feedback loop." Aurelia considered the idea, quickly running through the theoretical implications in her mind. "It could work," she said lowly, "but the backlash would be intense. If we're still in this section when it happens." "We won't be," Marcus assured her. "Can you set it up so the feedback builds gradually? Give us time to get clear." Aurelia nodded. "I think so, but we'll have to move fast once I start the process." She turned back to the wall, placing her hands against it once more. This time, instead of trying to counteract the gravitational waves, she began to create a reflective field, one that would catch the distortions and bounce them back toward their source with increasing intensity. The work was even more demanding than her previous attempt, requiring a level of precision and control she had never before achieved. But somehow, with Marcus's steady presence beside her, she found herself able to focus more clearly, to channel her abilities with greater finesse. "It's done," she said finally. Stepping back from the wall, her legs felt weak, and she swayed slightly. Light-headed from the exertion, Marcus caught her arm, steadying her. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Aurelia replied. 5, maybe 6, before the feedback reaches critical levels. "Oh, then we need to move." Marcus supported her as they began to make their way back through the maintenance tunnels, moving as quickly as Aurelia's exhausted state would allow. They had barely reached the main corridor when they were intercepted by a security team led by none other than Commander Lysander. "Solaris," he snapped, his eyes darting between her and Marcus. "What are you doing here? You should be in the control room helping to stabilize the station." Before Aurelia could respond, one of the security officers stepped forward, his hand moving to the weapon at his hip. With a shock, Aurelia recognized the distinctive ridge pattern on his forehead that marked him as Varian. "Sir," the officer said to Lysander, "these two were seen entering a restricted area without authorization. They should be detained for questioning." Lysander frowned, looking increasingly suspicious. "Is this true, Solaris?" Aurelia glanced at Marcus, a silent communication passing between them. They didn't have time for explanations or bureaucratic delays. "Commander," she said, choosing her words carefully, "the gravitational attacks on the station are being generated by a device in the Varian diplomatic quarter. We've initiated a process that should neutralize it, but we need to evacuate this section immediately." "Preposterous," the Varian officer cut in. "These are serious allegations against a respected member species of the station. Commander, I insist that they be taken into custody until this matter can be properly investigated." Lysander hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to the station's safety and the proper protocols for handling such accusations. "Commander." Marcus stepped forward, his diplomatic training evident in his calm, authoritative tone. "I am Marcus Clark, Earth Defense Force Intelligence. I can confirm Engineer Solaris's assessment of the situation. We have approximately—" He glanced at Aurelia, who mouthed 3 minutes. 3 minutes before a gravitational backlash occurs in this sector. I strongly recommend immediate evacuation. The Varian officer's hand was now fully on his weapon. "He's lying. Commander, there is no such device. This human is attempting to create a diplomatic incident to discredit the Varian Confederacy." Lysander looked between them, indecision clear on his face. "I need more than just your word. Clark, do you have any evidence to support these claims?" Before Marcus could respond, the Varian officer drew his weapon, pointing it not at Marcus or Aurelia, but at Lysander. "Enough of this. No one is evacuating. No one is going anywhere." Understanding dawned on Lysander's face. "You're part of this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The attacks, they were your doing. Not just mine," the Varian replied with a cold smile. "But yes, we saw an opportunity and took it. The golden freak here," he nodded toward Aurelia, "has been most cooperative, even if unwittingly. The data we've gathered on her abilities will advance our research by decades." Aurelia felt a surge of anger at being referred to as a freak, a term she had heard too many times in her life. But there was no time for anger now, not with the countdown to the gravitational backlash ticking away in her mind. "Commander," she said urgently, "whatever you believe about me or Marcus, you must know that I would never endanger the station. Please, order the evacuation. We have less than 2 minutes." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Lysander nodded sharply. "Security team, escort all personnel out of this sector immediately. Sound the evacuation alarm." The Varian officer's face contorted with rage. "You fool!" he snarled, and fired his weapon. Lysander fell backward, a smoking hole in his chest where the energy bolt had struck him. The other security officers, momentarily stunned by the sudden violence, were slow to react. The Varian turned his weapon toward Aurelia. "You," he spat. "You've ruined everything." Before he could fire, Marcus launched himself forward, tackling the Varian to the ground. The weapon discharged, the energy bolt searing a black mark into the ceiling as the two men grappled. Aurelia rushed to Lysander's side, checking for signs of life. His pulse was weak, erratic, but he was still breathing. "Help him!" she ordered one of the shocked security officers, who snapped out of his daze and knelt beside his commander. Aurelia then turned her attention to Marcus and the Varian, who were still locked in combat. Despite his human strength, Marcus was clearly at a disadvantage against the physically superior Varian. Without hesitation, Aurelia stepped forward, grabbed the Varian by the back of his uniform, and lifted him bodily away from Marcus. With a controlled but forceful motion, she slammed the alien against the wall, pinning him there with one hand. "Sound the evacuation," she ordered the remaining security officers, who quickly complied, triggering the alarm that would clear the sector. "You can't stop it," the Varian hissed, struggling against her grip. "The device is self-sustaining now. Even if your feedback trick works, the gravitational cascade will tear this station apart." Aurelia's eyes narrowed. "Not if I have anything to say about it." She turned to Marcus, who was picking himself up from the floor, a bruise already forming on his cheek. "Get everyone out," she said. "I need to stay and contain the backlash." Marcus shook his head, understanding immediately what she was planning. "No, it's too dangerous. You can't absorb that much gravitational energy. It will kill you." "I have to try," Aurelia insisted. "There's no other way to protect the station." The Varian laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Yes, little freak. Sacrifice yourself. Prove your worth to those who have always despised you." Aurelia ignored him, her focus entirely on Marcus, whose face was a mask of concern and determination. "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly. "Marcus, please," Aurelia began, but he cut her off. "No, we do this together or not at all." The conviction in his voice, the unwavering support in his eyes, it touched something deep within Aurelia, a place that had long ago resigned itself to solitude and isolation. "All right," she said finally, "together." With the Varian secured by the remaining security officers and Lysander being evacuated for medical treatment, Aurelia and Marcus hurried back toward the Varian diplomatic quarter, against the flow of personnel fleeing the sector. "What's the plan?" Marcus asked as they ran. "I'm going to try to create a containment field around the device," Aurelia explained. "When the backlash hits, I'll channel the energy, disperse it safely, but I'll need help maintaining my focus." They reached the security door, which was now open, the Varian's authorization codes having been forcibly extracted by station security. Beyond it lay a large, circular chamber dominated by a pulsing device that looked like a miniature star, suspended in midair by invisible forces. The gravitational distortions around it were so intense that the very air seemed to waver and bend, creating a shimmering effect that distorted vision. "It's beautiful," Marcus murmured, despite the danger it represented. "And deadly," Aurelia added, approaching the device cautiously. "The feedback is already building. We have maybe a minute before it reaches critical levels." She positioned herself directly in front of the device, her feet planted firmly on the ground. "Stand behind me," she instructed Marcus, "and whatever happens, don't let me lose focus." As Marcus moved into position, Aurelia closed her eyes and extended her hands toward the pulsing orb of energy. The golden light beneath her skin began to glow brighter, illuminating the chamber with its warm radiance. She could feel the gravitational forces swirling around the device, a chaotic maelstrom of energy that was growing more intense by the second. With careful, deliberate concentration, she began to shape a containment field around it, a sphere of counterforce that would hold the backlash in check. The strain was immediate and overwhelming. It felt as if she were trying to hold back an ocean with her bare hands, the pressure building against her mental barriers until she thought her skull might crack from the effort. A groan escaped her lips as she fought to maintain control, her body trembling with exertion. "You can do this!" Marcus's voice came from behind her, steady and sure. "Focus on my voice. You're not alone, Aurelia. I'm right here with you." His words anchored her, giving her something to hold on to as the gravitational forces threatened to tear her consciousness apart. She redoubled her efforts, pouring more of her energy into the containment field. The device began to pulse more rapidly, its light becoming almost painfully bright as the feedback loop approached its peak. Aurelia could feel the moment when it reached critical mass, a sudden surge of power that slammed against her containment field like a tidal wave. For a terrible moment, she thought she would be overwhelmed, that her defenses would crumble and the station would be torn apart by the unleashed forces. But then she felt Marcus's hands on her shoulders, his presence solid and reassuring behind her. "Together," he said, and somehow, impossibly, she found the strength to hold on. The gravitational energy began to flow into her, through her, around her. It was like nothing she had ever experienced before, raw power, pure and primal, filling her every cell. The golden light beneath her skin brightened until she seemed to be made of pure energy, a being of light and force rather than flesh and blood. With a final, Herculean effort, she redirected the energy, dispersing it harmlessly into the vacuum of space beyond the station's hull. The device, deprived of its power source and damaged by the backlash, flickered and died, the pulsing light fading to nothing. Aurelia swayed, then collapsed, her strength completely spent. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her gently in his arms. "Aurelia! Aurelia, can you hear me?" His voice seemed to come from very far away, echoing strangely in her ears. She tried to respond, but her lips wouldn't form the words, her body no longer answering to her commands. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, she had a fleeting thought. At least she had proven her worth. At least, in the end, she had been able to protect those who had always feared and shunned her. With that thought, she surrendered to the darkness, Marcus's voice following her down into unconsciousness. Aurelia awoke to the soft beep of medical monitors and the distinctive antiseptic smell of the station's medical bay. For a moment, she lay still, taking inventory of her body. There was no pain, only a bone-deep weariness that made even the thought of movement exhausting. "Welcome back," a familiar voice said from beside her. She turned her head, even that small motion requiring effort, to see Marcus sitting in a chair next to her bed. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a day's worth of stubble on his chin, but his smile was as warm as ever. "How long?" she asked, her voice a raspy whisper. 3 days, Marcus replied, reaching for a cup of water and helping her take a sip. "You had us worried for a while there." Aurelia let the cool water soothe her parched throat before asking, "The station?" "Safe, thanks to you." Marcus assured her. There was some structural damage in the variant sector, but no hull breaches, no casualties except... He hesitated. "Lysander," Aurelia finished for him. Marcus nodded. "He's alive, but it was close. The doctors say he'll recover, though it will take time. Aurelia closed her eyes, relief washing over her. Despite their difficult relationship, she had never wished harm on her commander. And the Varians, the ones involved in the plot, have been taken into custody, Marcus said. There's going to be a full inquiry, diplomatic repercussions. It's a mess, but at least the immediate danger is past. Aurelia nodded slowly, processing this information. And you? What happens to you now? Marcus's smile turned slightly sheepish. Well, my cover is blown, so my days as a covert operative are probably numbered. But the Earth Diplomatic Corps has offered me a legitimate position here on Nexus 7 as a liaison to the Gravitational Research Division. Which means you'll be staying, Aurelia said, trying to keep the hope out of her voice and failing miserably. Which means I'll be staying, Marcus confirmed, his eyes holding hers. If that's all right with you. Aurelia felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with her gravitational abilities. It's more than all right. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger by the second. You know, Marcus said finally, when I was first assigned to investigate you, I was given a file full of clinical descriptions, scientific theories about your abilities, assessments of your potential threat level. Nowhere in that file did it mention your intelligence, your dedication, your courage. He reached out, taking her hand in his, a gesture that would have been unthinkable to Aurelia just weeks ago. They saw you as a curiosity at best, a weapon at worst. But you're so much more than that. Aurelia, you're extraordinary. Aurelia felt a lump forming in her throat, emotions she had long suppressed threatening to overwhelm her. For most of my life, she said softly, I've been defined by what makes me different. My size, my abilities, my abnormality. I've never been just me. You are to me, Marcus said as Simon. Just Aurelia. Brilliant. Brave. Beautiful Aurelia. The word beautiful hung in the air between them, a declaration that went against everything Aurelia had ever been told about herself. And yet, looking into Marcus's eyes, she could see that he meant it, that to him, she was beautiful. Before she could respond, the door to the medical bay slid open, and a surprising figure entered. Terran, one of the Solarian engineers who had always been among the most vocal in his disdain for her. He stopped short when he saw that she was awake, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. Engineer Solaris, he said, his usual contemptuous tone replaced by something approaching respect. That is, the engineering team wanted to know how you were progressing. Aurelia blinked in surprise. I'm recovering, she said cautiously. Thank you for asking. Terran nodded stiffly. Good. That's good. Commander Lysander asked me to inform you that your position in the department awaits your return. When you are well enough, of course. Did he now? Aurelia couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. He did, Terran confirmed. He also mentioned something about reconsidering your stabilization protocols. He thinks they might have merit after all. Coming from Lysander, this was tantamount to a full apology and admission that he had been wrong about her work. Aurelia was momentarily speechless. That is, the team will be glad to have you back, Terran added, and then, with a nod to Marcus, he departed as abruptly as he had arrived. Well, Marcus said into the stunned silence that followed, it seems your reputation has undergone something of a transformation. So it seems, Aurelia agreed, still trying to process this unexpected development. I think what I said to Commander Lysander might have played a part in this. Actually, Marcus continued, a slightly mischievous look stealing into his eyes. When I visited him in the medical bay yesterday, I may have mentioned that Earth was considering offering you a position at our gravitational research facility, the largest in the system, with resources Nexus 7 could only dream of. Aurelia gave him a look of mock severity. You didn't? I did, Marcus admitted, not looking remotely repentant. The prospect of losing their most talented engineer seemed to give him a new perspective on your value to the station. That was underhanded, Aurelia said, trying to sound disapproving but unable to suppress a smile. I prefer to think of it as creative diplomacy. Marcus replied with a grin. Besides, it's not entirely untrue. Earth would be lucky to have you. But his expression grew more serious. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, whatever you want to do next, I'll support you. Aurelia looked at him, this human who had seen past her differences, who had stood by her side when it mattered most, who looked at her now not with fear or suspicion, but with warmth and admiration. What I want, she said slowly, is to stay here, to continue my work, and… She hesitated, then pushed through her uncertainty. To see where this thing between us leads. Marcus's smile was like the sunrise after a long, dark night. I want that too, he said, squeezing her hand gently. Very much. 3 months later. Aurelia stood at the viewport overlooking the central concourse of Nexus 7, watching the bustle of activity below. The station had recovered from the Varian incident, repairs completed, routines re-established. Life had returned to normal, or rather, a new normal. For Aurelia, that new normal included leadership of her own research team, implementing the stabilization protocols that were now being hailed as a breakthrough in gravitational engineering. It included the respect of her colleagues, even Lysander, who had emerged from his brush with death a somewhat humbler and more open-minded individual. And it included Marcus, who now stood beside her at the viewport, his shoulder brushing against her arm in a casual display of affection that still sometimes took her by surprise. Penny for your thoughts, he asked, following her gaze to the concourse below. I was just thinking about how much has changed. She replied, 3 months ago, I couldn't walk through that concourse without causing a stir. Now you're a hero, Marcus finished for her. The woman who saved Nexus 7. Aurelia shook her head, still uncomfortable with such grand declarations. I'm just an engineer doing my job. An extraordinary engineer, Marcus corrected, slipping his hand into hers. Below them, a group of Solarian children passed by, looking up at the viewport. One of them, a girl slightly taller than her peers, pointed excitedly when she spotted Aurelia, instead of the fear or mockery that such attention would once have brought. The child's face lit up with admiration, and she waved enthusiastically. Aurelia found herself waving back, a lump forming in her throat at this simple gesture of acceptance. I'm going to enter the mentorship program Lysander proposed, she said abruptly, turning to face Marcus. For younger Solarians with gravitational sensitivity, there are others like me out there, not exactly the same, but different in their own ways. They need to know that being different doesn't mean being alone. Marcus's smile was filled with pride. They couldn't ask for a better mentor. Aurelia looked down at their joined hands, his smaller, darker one enveloped in her larger, golden one. Such a simple thing, and yet it represented everything she had once believed impossible for herself. Connection, acceptance, belonging. You know, she said thoughtfully, when you first smiled at me that day in the concourse, I thought you must be mocking me somehow. It never occurred to me that you might simply be… kind. Not just kind, Marcus corrected, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Interested, intrigued, attracted. Even now, after months together, such direct statements of his attraction to her could make Aurelia blush, the golden energy beneath her skin pulsing a little faster. "What made you smile at me that day?" she asked, a question that had lingered in her mind since the beginning. "When everyone else looked away, what made you different?" Marcus considered this for a moment. "I saw someone who stood out, who didn't try to hide or diminish herself to make others comfortable. There was a strength in that, a courage that I admired immediately." He smiled, the expression lighting his entire face. "Also, you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I'm a firm believer in smiling at beautiful women." Aurelia laughed, the sound echoing in the corridor around them. "Smooth talker." "I mean it," Marcus insisted, though his eyes twinkled with humor. "Golden skin, towering height, the way you moved like gravity itself couldn't quite hold you down. You were magnificent. You still are." He reached up, cupping her cheek in his palm, and Aurelia leaned into the touch, no longer flinching from such intimate contact. "We should go," she said after a moment. "The ceremony will be starting soon." The ceremony in question was the formal recognition of the new joint Earth-Solarian Gravitational Research Initiative, a direct result of the events 3 months prior. Aurelia, as the project's lead researcher, was expected to give a speech, something that would once have filled her with dread but now merely caused a flutter of nervous anticipation. As they made their way through the station, Aurelia was acutely aware of the looks they received, a towering Solarian woman and a human man, hand in hand. But where once those looks had been filled with suspicion and fear, now they held curiosity, respect, and occasionally, something like hope. They were a symbol, she realized, not just of interspecies cooperation, but of the power of connection across differences, of seeing beyond the surface to the person beneath. As they entered the grand assembly hall where the ceremony would take place, Aurelia paused, looking around at the gathered representatives from a dozen different species. Among them, she spotted Terran, who nodded to her with newfound respect. Lysander, still moving carefully but standing straight and proud, and even a small delegation of Varians, those who had denounced the actions of their rogue elements and sought to make amends. "Nervous?" Marcus asked, noticing her hesitation. Aurelia considered the question, taking stock of her emotions. "No," she said with mild surprise. "Not anymore." She was different. Yes, she always would be. But different didn't mean wrong, and it certainly didn't mean alone. With Marcus by her side, and a newfound confidence in her step, Aurelia moved forward to take her place in a universe that finally seemed to have room for her unique, golden light.